You'd be surprised how often companies buy a penetration test and then never actually speak to the person doing the test. Not once. Not before it starts, not while it's happening. Maybe on a 30-minute readout call at the very end where the tester awkwardly reads out a couple slides and then logs off. Maybe. But mostly, you just get a PDF dropped into your inbox like it's your final grade before your professor disappears for the summer. That shouldn't be normal, but unfortunately, it's shockingly common. So here's what the chain often looks like. You have you talk to sales, maybe you talk to a project manager, and then there's a pen test team lead, and then maybe they talk to the tester, and then maybe even the tester talks to a technical writer, and that is who outputs your final report. And then it flows back. You have the report, it goes to the team lead, maybe even to a delivery manager, and then finally to you. By the time you read it, it's been filtered through 5 layers of telephone, and no one is quite sure if the thing you specifically asked for actually made it to the person doing the testing. I've worked at places like that, and I've seen how messy it gets. And not just for the client, it's a bad setup for the testers too. Instead of jumping on a call with the client and getting to know the environment, asking smart questions, maybe even following up if something looks strange directly, through email after the call. Instead, the tester just gets handed a spreadsheet or a text file of URLs and test credentials. Go. That's it. That's all they get. No walkthrough, no context, no chance to hear, hey, we're worried about this legacy admin panel. Can you focus a little bit there? And the customer also loses their chance to shape the test, to call it what's important. Maybe they tell the salesman or the PM, maybe it gets passed along, but you never really know. And from the tester's perspective, there's nothing quite like putting the final touches on a report when somebody from sales suddenly pings you. Hey, did you include that internal billing tool in the test? I told them we'd cover that too. Now the tester has to go back, revisit that surface, rewrite the sections of the report, delay delivery, and then probably bump into their next kickoff. It's not that the tester doesn't want to do it. They're usually happy to dig into a new app, but they should have been told about it at the start, and the client could have said it to them directly. That conversation never happened though because the process didn't allow for it. And now the client ends up with a test where the one thing they specifically asked for feels like an afterthought. If you've never done a pen test before, or maybe you're just trying to pass an audit, or maybe you've worked with one of those big corporate firms where the test doesn't seem to be the only thing that's black box, you might assume that that's how it works. It's normal to be kept at arm's length and to get a report without a relationship. But it's not, and it doesn't have to be. The value isn't just in the findings and the report, although those are important. But it's also in the conversations and the relationships and the partnerships built and the knowledge and peace of mind you get from working directly with consultants that take an interest in your success. That's why we're called consultants, not just pen testers, not PDF generators. We're here to help you understand the risk, fix what matters, and feel confident in your system, not just check the compliance box, although, we'll do that too. So if you're about to hire a pen test firm or even just evaluating options, here's what to look for before you sign anything. For starters, are you being funneled straight to a sales guy who couldn't tell a stored XSS from a BLT? I'm not saying every salesperson needs to be a hacker. That's not realistic. But if they can't explain the difference between a vulnerability scan and a manual test, or they're saying yes to absolutely everything with no hesitation, that may be a sign. A sign that they're not setting realistic expectations, and if they're overpromising, somebody else is going to underdeliver. Here's a green flag, on the other hand. Our tester is actually on the intro call. That is a good sign. It doesn't mean they have to be. Testers are busy, and we're not talking about the scoping call here, by the way. We're talking about the intro call, maybe your first touch with this company. So they might be, deep into somebody else's system when you're doing these intros and unable to join the call. But if they are there, even just to say hello or listen quietly, that tells me this is a team that values collaboration. They're not hiding the talent behind the process, and that is a green flag. So now on to that scoping call. That's where it starts to matter more. If no one technical shows up to the scoping call, that's when you start this game of telephone. You'll describe your app, maybe even ask a few questions of the team, maybe highlight something specific you want tested, and it'll all get passed along later. Third hand, maybe not at all. Another red flag is if you have a question mid-engagement and your only point of contact is the sales rep or a project manager. You ask something like, hey, did the tester notice this? And the answer you get is, well, let me funnel that back to the team. Okay, fine, that might happen, but watch how it happens. Does it take a couple hours? Does it take a couple days? Does it take 3 days and a calendar invite? Do you eventually hear from the tester directly? That's good. Or maybe CC'd on the reply. That's fine. Or is everything filtered through a middleman? Do they seem like they're working as a team or like they're communicating via legal courier? You'd be surprised how many firms or even internal teams have these rigid, almost military-style chains of command. You're not allowed to talk to the testers. The testers are not allowed to talk to you. Everything goes through the PM. And by the time your question makes it over to the right person, the test might be nearly over. That's not agile. That's not collaborative. That's just process for the sake of process. So what can you do? Front load your questions early, before the contract is signed. Don't be afraid to ask things like, who's going to be performing the test? Now, if you have somebody on the call that raises their hand and goes, that's me, you're in great shape. That means you get a name. You probably have their email. You can reach out and ask questions and talk directly to the person doing the testing. If they say something like, we'll assign a senior tester. Okay, maybe not as good. You would prefer them to be on these initial calls, but that's still good that you're getting, at least a job title. You're getting a guarantee that it's not going to be passed off to, an overseas contractor or a junior tester. But if you get a long-winded answer about scheduling complexity and the process and delivery teams and planetary alignment, you might want to look elsewhere then. That usually just means they're trying to assign a junior tester or that outsourced contractor, and they're hoping you won't ask again. So another question to ask is, will I be able to talk directly to the tester during the engagement? The answer should be yes, not just, we'll relay questions. You should have an email or a Slack, or some way to have a real conversation with the person doing the testing. Because if you're investing in a pen test and you can't even talk to the person doing it, you're not buying a test, you're buying a document. If everything has to be funneled through layers of sales and delivery and nobody ever just says, here's the tester, ask them directly, that's not just a red flag, that's a red banner. And while you're asking questions, here's another one that most people miss. Who writes the report? Because you would think it would be the person that did the test, right? Sometimes it is, but in some shops, it's not. The tester finishes the work, dumps notes and screenshots into a folder, and then the report gets written by a technical writer. Now, God love them, I'm sure they're great people, but I've just never seen that setup work well. They're not on the engagement, they weren't there when the bug was found, they don't know how the exploit chain came together, and now they're trying to turn a pile of half-baked notes into something that makes sense for your engineering team. And the deeper problem is this. When a firm starts using technical writers for reporting, it's often a subtle sign that their testers were turning in garbage. Bad grammar, weak details, unclear write-ups, and instead of fixing the actual issue, they added a layer. They added a translator or, a patch basically. That's not a solution, that's just hiding the symptom. The report is supposed to show how the test was done. If the person doing the work can't explain it clearly, you've got a bigger problem than just, missing commas here and there. Because the one thing that separates a good pen test from a waste of time isn't the tools, or the price, or how many findings they crammed into the report. It's whether the person doing the work can actually talk to you, understand your priorities, and adapt the test to your reality. And overall, whether they give a crap. Because let's be honest, it's a whole lot easier to care when you've actually met the people, had a conversation, built some trust, instead of just working off a scoping doc and a prayer. That's where the value is, and that's what you should expect. And that's what you should really demand. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this helps. Goodbye.